We are on the second break in the questioning of John Grieve at the undercover policing inquiry. John Grieve was the head of the Violent and Racial Crime Task Force, which was set up in 1998 before the start of the second half of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry. He is being asked questions about the meeting between Richard Walton and HN81 in the back garden of Bob Lambert. He admitted that he didn't remember Richard Walton until Mark Ellison reminded him of him. He said that he wasn't a very upfront officer, which, from what we can gather from the way in which John Grieve speaks, is absolutely damning. He has been a very straightforward and remarkably polite witness, which is very unusual. I'm joined by Abdin Lubb as the Undercover Research Group. What have you made of what he's had to say?
Well, he seems honest all over, which is like a
weird
thing for us to have that in the inquiry here. We've had so many witnesses evading questions and lying and what have you. He has straight answers to all questions. If he doesn't know, he says so. And he's nuanced and he's like human almost. Yeah.
I mean, he was asked about the relevance of the intelligence that HN81 gave to Richard Walton. He dismisses all of it. He says none of it is interesting or useful. He said it would be a contamination of the intelligence that he was receiving from elsewhere. He said he did not need to know what the supporters of the Lawrence family, who they were or what the Lawrence family thought. He said he could see them in the inquiry. He could ask the Lawrence family themselves. They would soon tell him. He seemed particularly annoyed about the briefings that he'd received from Special Branch against Suresh Grover. He talked about meeting Suresh Grover, who was with the mother of Ricky Reel, Sue Reel, who is actually here today again, and how that it was important that he spoke to such people. It was fundamental to his role. He talked about that it may have been possible that intelligence on movement with justice could have been of use, but then he applied some criteria to it, and it did not meet any of the criteria. He referred to some case law from 1973, which in great detail, I mean, a tremendous level of recall from him, which, kind of said that it depends on the nature of the target, the history of the organization, and the fact that it would be impossible to get that kind of intelligence from any other source. That it was only if that criteria was met that it would be admissible, and it hadn't been. He said the only intelligence that he had any interest in coming from Special Branch, the only thing he was after was on the extreme right wing, which is obviously outside of it all happens in closed, so we don't get to hear about any of that today.
No, so in fact, what he's saying is that all spying and infiltrating groups that were involved in black justice campaigns, or just family groups. He says it wasn't even a campaign. It was just the Lawrences were like a family who had lost their son in a murder. It wasn't a campaign. They just wanted justice. So all spying on groups like this was like totally unnecessary. And all the defending of it that we have seen from both undercover officers and their superiors have been totally undermined by this, because he was one of the consumers of this intelligence, and he said there was no need of it at all. And the families have been hurt by this, and should this have come out, and also should the meeting that Walton had with HN81 about the Lawrence family, would that have come out, that would have done so much damage to community relation.
Well, he said they couldn't have got any worse at the time.
Yeah,
but this would have still damaged
it. That would have led to riots. The reason the SDS Special Branch said they had for spying on those groups to prevent riots and to sort of get a taste of the atmosphere, or what people thought, that that spying in itself would have caused the riots that were not going to happen any other way.
I mean, it was interesting, his response to the assessment by Bob Lambert that the second half of the intelligence from HN81 would aid the commissioner in avoiding having the second half of the inquiry taking place in venues that may result in some disruption. He was really quite offended by this. He said that he attended a lot of town hall meetings and that he had never been into one where there wasn't somebody who wanted to disrupt. This is part of democracy. The idea that disruption was a problem is ridiculous. It was only if this spilled over into violent disorder, then certainly, but this is not what's being talked about. Disruption is part of the democratic process.
It's almost something that we have always said.
Well, quite, yeah. It is very, I mean, I find it particularly weird to be in a situation where a police witness is making perfectly sensible statements.
Yeah, you could agree to, and you could have, like, it's
unique, let's be honest.
It's absolutely unique, and I'm sorry that we only have a morning with him, but maybe seeing how old he is and how fragile, like he's perfectly clear in his head, but physically he's pretty fragile. So I can understand that they only do a morning with him, but it's a shame because he's got very interesting insights.
I mean, he talks about that, he claims that he'd never heard of the SDS as the SDS. He knew them as the Harries from a previous role, which was the nickname of the unit. He says that, his dealings with them, he said he had a lot of dealings with criminal undercover officers, and, he would have been very surprised if a criminal undercover officer would ever been taken into a meeting with an outsider. This is just not how it's done. He's very dismissive of the way in which they operated.
Yeah, well, yeah. We know by now that the SDS did a lot of things not the way they should have been done. So there's no surprise there. But it's like it sounds so much more honest than what former Commissioner Condon said yesterday, that he was appalled by everything he found out, but failed to mention that it was his fault, that he kind of restructured the entire Metropolitan Police, but was too afraid to touch special branch, so claims he never knew about the SDS or the Harries, which we don't believe. But he wasn't as honest to say that it was his fault that this had been able to continue to exist.
We heard about the report which John Grieve authored with Julie French on the fact that the finding of institutional racism by McPherson was justified. This was what resulted in him getting so many death threats. Of course, he referred to the rage of senior officers to that response. He talked about the response from the Met Police lawyers, saying that it undermined numerous tribunals that were taking place, undermining their case and proving the police were aware that institutional racism was a fact. What's really interesting, actually, I find, is that every time institutionalized racism is mentioned, he's like, no, it's institutional racism. That's the finding, and it's important. It's a collective failing of the Met Police to provide a professional and appropriate service to people because of their skin color, their culture, or their ethnic minority status. He's very keen to point that out. I mean, also another little point is he's always so polite. I mean, he says, "I'm sorry to ask you a question," but which is a complete opposite. Complete opposite from every other witness we've ever had.
Coleman was all the time talking over the KC and just interrupting,
very rude.
it, like really, really very rude. And he's really polite. It's funny that he keeps saying sir, although he's talking. This is of course officially the way it is, in an inquiry, it's the chair who's doing the research.
Yeah, he's doing it properly.
He's doing it properly, but it's like weird because
everybody else does it wrong.
Yeah, and he's facing the KC who's female, so the sir seems inappropriate, but it's not. And it's very much sort of part of the way he speaks.
And we've had some comments from Jack Shepherd. The eminently forgettable Richard Walton. Grieve clearly thinks he's a dick. Yes, I mean, John Grieve is not a man to use strong language in any sense. I got the impression when he is slightly critical of somebody, it's obvious that he thinks very little of them. Another comment again from Jack Shepherd. It seems that Condon's acceptance of institutional racism was only made when he had no choice. Grieve seems that he took the position of his own accord. Yeah, you very much get that impression. You also really do get the impression that he doesn't claim to be prescient at all, that in fact he followed the evidence of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry in detail and came to that conclusion as the evidence came out, which is again how it's meant to work, but very rarely is the case. It's only a short break. We should head back in fairly soon. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for all the likes and the shares. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, it's fine.
Okay, thanks for joining us. We'll do a longer video at lunchtime. Bye for now.